The following program is intended for an adult audience. It is separate from my work or that of any guest with any other entity. Welcome to the Education Upgrade Podcast. I'm your host, Jake Schulke. To support this podcast, please subscribe on YouTube and check out the links in the description. What's more, teachers felt empowered by this work. Prior to this work, the ways their students behaved, what motivated them, whether they cheated or not, how much they understood or cared about their grade, had seemed to the teachers to be fixed and often chalked up to, that's how kids are these days. But the teachers who tried these practices found that they could actually change students' attitudes and behaviors. Students who had seemed unmotivated and even resistant to learning became more engaged. Relationships between students and teachers, which had been based on compliance and a system of extrinsic threats and rewards, were now partnerships based on trust, transparency, and perhaps most importantly, hope. Students persevered when they struggled, took initiative, stopped cheating, and wanted to learn even after the test, all because of changes to how teachers graded. That's from the book Grading for Equity by Joe Feldman. I'm with Miss Morgan Torres-Unger.
Hi, everyone.
This is the Education Upgrade Podcast. I'm Jake Schulke. So, Miss Morgan, thanks for being here this evening. Good evening to you.
Yes. Good evening to you.
I'm excited for you to be here for our first book study episode.
This is going to be fun.
I think
really
so.
Excited about this.
I'm so glad that we talked about this. The book came up organically in conversation. We mentioned it when you were on the podcast 3 weeks ago or so, and I was able to get a copy for you, and it seems like you're into it.
The buy-in is there. That quote in and itself was enough to buy my interest.
Man, if you can hear that and not want to know what else is in the book, then we're different kinds of teachers, man.
Sure are. A little that different breed action, huh?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. That's toward the end of the prologue. And so anybody that hears this, I definitely recommend buy the book, but it's available in audiobook also. And I benefited mostly from doing both.
Yes.
From first listening to it on the audiobook version, and I'll link both those in the show notes. And if you want to buy it, use the link in the show notes to buy it to help support this podcast. But to listen to it on audiobook and then go back to the print book and make notes and do little page tabs and underlines and highlights, and I found that very helpful. But if you can only do one, pick whatever one you have time for. If all you have time is the audiobook while you're on the treadmill folding the laundry, do that. And if all you have time for is to listen to this podcast, then hopefully our book study will
do it
help.
Justice.
Hopefully. I mean, Joe Feldman, who, by the way, he lives in the East Bay right now. He's a local.
Really?
He lives in Oakland.
That's awesome.
Yeah, or maybe Alameda is where he lives. And anyways, he's in the East Bay.
Cool.
Yeah, I haven't talked to him personally. He's done a lot of great interviews. He's on other podcasts a lot, and maybe someday I'll get to talk to him on here.
Awesome.
But this book's pretty recent. I think it came out 2018. And we're recording this in 2023, so it's a pretty recent work. Cites a lot of good sources, cites a lot of studies, very science-based, but has a good ethical appeal also. The book's called Grading for Equity. And I know when I first got this book, my school district, to their credit, got a copy for everybody at my school, and it showed up in our mailboxes, but I didn't know what it was for. And just seeing the title, and with the place I was right then, we got it during COVID time.
Got it.
And so, everybody was struggling, didn't have time to read a new book. And seeing the title Grading for Equity, I didn't know what that meant until I 3 years later read the book. And now that I've read it and incorporated some of the stuff, I really think it's something worth sharing.
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, kind of going back to audiobook or print, if this is a completely new concept that you're interested in but not too sure about how much you want to commit to, listen to it. Listen to it first and digest it. That is, at least for me, that was the best way for me to approach that, not having something in front of me to follow along and read with. Did it while I was driving, but as I was listening, I was able to simultaneously brainstorm, kind of take notes with that. And so having that almost like a lecture given by listening to the audiobook versus having to kind of generate that, inflection or whatever by reading it. That would be my suggestion for anybody that's just thinking about whether or not to how you want to digest this. Audiobook would be how I started.
Totally. Listen to it in the car, throw it in the AirPods while you're at the gym or, whatever. Or, we're all going back to school right now. Like, do it while you're prepping your classroom or cleaning up after the kids leave.
On your way to work.
If you get it a half hour here and a half hour there, you'll be done with the book in no time. So that opening quote from the prologue, that's toward the end of the prologue. That's literally the second to the last page of the prologue. And there's a lot in there. Some of the things that he encapsulates in that kind of summative quote, talking about the outcomes of having changed grading practices in a large group of teachers, starting first with himself and knowing the why and sharing it with people, helping them try new things. Some of those outcomes, students who had seemed unmotivated and even resistant to learning, everybody's picturing a kid in their head right now.
At least one.
Yeah, probably a group or a personality type. Students who had seemed unmotivated and even resistant to learning became more engaged. Imagine engagement from a student who appears resistant to learning. Relationships between students and teachers, which had been based on compliance and a system of extrinsic threats and rewards, were now partnerships based on trust, transparency, and perhaps most importantly, hope. Why would you not want that?
I mean, even bringing it back to the very last sentence there, students persevered when they struggled. Is that not the type of environment that we want to foster, right? Persevering through that struggle, taking initiative, stopping cheating. I mean, we'll get to it when we get to those chapters and whatnot, but saying, how effective is your homework? How do you know that they're not getting help from mom, dad, or, even a little bit more than help from, any siblings with their homework, and seeing how cheating truly is not only impacting everything that we do, but it is generally a part of the culture of education. It is how a lot of students and families navigate what they think is success.
They learn how to work the game, right?
Absolutely.
It's a game. When it's a points-based game, based largely on compliance and task completion. I remember living at home with my mom and my two sisters. There was a spelling take-home homework where you have to use a new maybe vocabulary would be a better description. Vocabulary homework where you have to use a word in a sentence. Mm-hmm. My youngest sister, shout out to little sis, one of the words was copy, and she wrote for her sentence, "Sometimes my mom does my homework and I copy it."
Excellent.
On her homework.
Kids say the darndest things, don't they? Moms, dads out there, shout out.
From the mouths of babes. But you and I just got done talking downstairs about how that parents want their kids to succeed. And if the family and the student perceive that the way to win at this game is through these other actions that don't necessarily include higher level learning, mm-hmm. then they're gonna play the game.
Mm-hmm. It's a little more teamwork than we had intended. But there's when you have a system and you learn it, that's how people become successful in all different varieties. So it's when we base everything on points, completely makes sense to how do I obtain the most? How do I get the most? What skills do I have? What skills does my baby have? Mm-hmm. That they're lacking that I can help with, because it's never seen as cheating. It's always seen as helping in that type of approach by some parents, at least.
Sure. And depending on your perspective and what the task is, that could be completely valid. Because if it's not a valuable learning experience, then why wouldn't you just help them get it done if it really is busy work based on your perception and experience?
Absolutely.
The prologue to this book kind of has two sections. The first part tells a story of a principal who begins work at a school and encounters some interesting data. And there's no way we could do it justice other than to sit here and read the whole book, which I'm of course not going to do. And I wouldn't be able to read it maybe as good as the professional reader or you. So definitely recommend everybody go read it or listen to it, preferably both. So this teacher goes to this school and realizes there are huge discrepancies in grading between teachers, even though based on all of the data one could look up, the kids are very similar. And in fact, they're performing in very similar ways. And their test results are very similar, but somehow their grades are not as similar as one might predict. And so the principal goes on to try to have conversations with teachers and learns that this is remarkably common. In fact, it's the norm for there to be wide variance in grading practices based on a number of different things that really come down to personally held beliefs.
Biases as well.
Yeah, biases, definitely. And tries to have the conversations with teachers about that grading and is met with nothing but resistance. Hard, firm resistance, to the point of confrontation, union grievance, etc. And it seems like a really common story. Morgan, have you tried to have conversations with any colleagues about how, grading practices?
Yeah, I mean, if you're not having conversations with your colleagues about grading practices, that's a conversation that you need to start. It makes you better, it makes them better, but we find that at least the common thread amongst my 7th grade group that we've most recently found is that we give similar assessments. So I'm a math and science teacher, and my partner gives similar, if not the exact same assessments, but our grades and the discrepancy between an A in my class is not the same as an A in my partner's class, and finding that the difference that we're having right now, our bias, is by points of effort. So a lot of the contention right now is how we perceive our own student success, that we have found of okay, well, this thing does work, this really isn't. And for all of our rubrics and assessments that we have some that are reflective of what the kids know, but it's not streamlined across every single assessment. We don't have a system that is consistent enough for the kids to be able to take and generalize to 8th grade, high school. So we've been talking about grading and seeing how we can all kind of be on the same page, as well as making sure that what we are asking our kids is at the level that they should be asked, whether it's higher or lower or, adapted for their IEP or their paperwork that they have. It gets contentious at times. To
find that to have that conversation about grading and also calibrating what success looks like between two teachers.
Absolutely.
I have had similar experiences, and everybody I've talked to has, teachers and administrators. Administrators seem to have the most difficult task of having these conversations with a whole school.
Definitely.
About the importance of, even if you only have 2 teachers that teach the same thing to the same grade, wouldn't you want one kid to get the same grade regardless of what teacher they have?
Absolutely.
You mentioned effort, and there's a quote in the second part of the prologue. So in the second part of the prologue, the author goes on to describe his own experience learning about grading And he explained some of the things that he learned as he started reading studies, reading papers about grading. And one of the things he said is, secondly, I learned that many of us evaluate students on criteria that are non-academic and highly susceptible to bias. For example, a teacher who evaluates a student's effort as part of the grade likely applies a culturally narrow definition of what effort looks like.
Totally.
So stuff's probably popping into your head right now.
Mm-hmm.
You thinking about some kids
Yes.
that have effort that looks different?
Absolutely.
What does that look like?
It's all based on their where they're coming from. So I'm trying to meet them where they're at. And in regards to the effort of students, there are certain behaviors that I would consider them giving effort. So whether it is organizing their work in a certain way, that's a level of effort for me, right? If that's a skill that I think that they need to work on, or whether it's work completion, just turning it in on time, that's a level of effort, as well as how much work is shown, right? That's a level of effort. But all of these factors, I personally incorporate into the grade, but it's all on a case-by-case basis.
Okay.
So it's not anything that is standardized. It's not anything that I hold every student to the same baseline or level, because not every student is coming to me from the same place and spot. Mm-hmm. So I try to be considerate of those things by incorporating effort of like, hey, dude, I saw that you turned that in on time. You haven't, first few weeks of school, you didn't turn anything in on time. Now we're getting some sort of a system where you're turning in something on time every other day. Cool, I see your effort, and I want to try and reward that. Mm-hmm. But again, that's me seeing how students can improve based on my perception of what success might look like. And my counterpart couldn't care less about things being, turned in on time, or, the way that certain activities are organized or set up visually for, for them to present or whatever it might be. Mm-hmm. So my bias with effort, and just the bias in general with trying to perceive what is effort, it could be anything. And that's where I think we get a little lost. Totally.
And then that's a normal, we all have implicit biases built into our intrinsic, programming in our brains. Mm-hmm. Can't control it. You can get better at noticing it.
Totally.
And we can definitely get better at keeping it from affecting a kid's chance of success or affecting their grade, which are highly connected. I mean, once you give a kid an F in secondary, you just keep, really at any grade, but the higher in grades you get, like giving a kid an F increases the chance they're going to drop out of high school. And if that kid is really learning zero, like,
what else is going on?
What else is going on, man? What else is going on with that kid, and what else is going on with you and your relationship with that kid, and in what ways you're trying to help them? And if they're not really learning zero, if they're learning more than zero, should they be getting an F just because they don't turn stuff in on your established due date, or it takes them longer to complete an assignment?
Totally.
Like we talked the last time you were here about kid that was coming to my class high sometimes, and took that kid longer to get work done than other kids, but always got it done. That kid's effort looked different. Somebody that didn't intimately know that child might look at them and say, oh my God, this kid is spacing out, they're daydreaming, they're preoccupied, I'm catching them on their phone. Well, who are they texting? Are they texting their mom about having to pick up their brother and sister from the elementary school? Like, are they worried about other stuff? Like, is their mom safe? Like, you don't know this kid, man.
Exactly.
Their effort might look different. And even if it takes them twice as long to get stuff done, like, should their grade suffer because of things that are out of their control, despite the fact that they're still learning?
Yeah, if they get it done, right?
Yeah. Like, the kid learns eventually, like, now that I look back on my grading practices, I definitely had a lot of emotional reactions.
Oh my gosh. Yes.
And hopefully, like, I had Dr. Derek Riddle on to talk about grading, and he said, man, I think you need to give yourself a little grace. Like, everybody needs to give themselves a little grace, that like what you're doing is helping. Like, you're helping kids. But if you have a vision for a system that helps them even more in an even better way. Okay, then let's start that work. But you can't beat yourself up about what you didn't know. And
Totally.
To say like, no, man, I was just naive. I wasn't doing a bad job. My credential program taught me nothing about grading.
I didn't hear much about it either, other than you would be given guidance by your district or your admin.
What a cop-out.
Right.
Because there is a body of science-based, evidence-based understanding of how grading in different ways affects kids. Mm-hmm. And not just psychologically and emotionally, but like, and that should be the most important part, but also like their success track and how much they're learning and how good they are going to continue to do in your class and beyond. Mm-hmm. So the fact that that's not its own, at least its own course in the credential program, seems really bad.
100%.
Because other than like relationships and then assessment and grading, I can't think of anything more important.
Oh, yeah, it's all teaching. It's like it is the point, right?
Yeah. What are the kids supposed to know and know how to do? Mm-hmm. That should be all of your assessment and all of your grading.
Exactly. Do they know it? Cool.
Right. And if not, then how do I help you? And then that's the teaching art and science, right? Mm-hmm. But yeah, looking back on what I did my first year, like, you know, we'll go into chapter 1, but one of the things that Feldman says in chapter 1 is that most of us do what was done to us.
Absolutely.
And he uses that verbiage, to us. Mm-hmm. And I agree with it. You know, when I started grading, all I knew was how all the classes through all of my 13 years at K-12 and then however many years it took me to finish college, like what most of those looked like. Percentage-based grades, weighted categories.
Absolutely. Cool.
And how much should those weights be? I don't know. Use your own judgment, which really just means bias.
Where are my point pushers at?
Right. Right. And now thinking like, after reading this book, I have a scientific brain. Mm-hmm. I need data. I need to analyze things.
Exactly.
And I need my grading to be an instrument, like a scientific calibrated machine. It needs to be beyond a thermometer. It needs to be a bridge. Yeah, nuclear magnetic resonance, thing. It needs to be calibrated. Mm-hmm. It needs to be precise. It needs to be accurate. It needs to tell me, what does a kid know and know how to do? And if two kids both have a B and they know a completely different amount, or they've learned a completely different amount of stuff, then my grade doesn't mean anything.
Exactly. It's not sugarcoating it.
Well, then I'm using it as an incentive or a punishment, mm-hmm. So one of the things in the first part of the prologue with this Principal Mallory, he says, what page is this on? I'll go to it. Man, good thing I can edit this later. Okay. Right before he goes into his own journey. Right at the end of the part about Mallory.
Okay.
Page 20 of the prologue. Were teachers different ways of evaluating and reporting student performance a hallmark of teachers' professionalism or an undermining of that professionalism? Oh. And did principals' avoidance of addressing the variance and inconsistency of grading represent support of their teachers, a détente between teachers and administrators, or an unspoken compromise that ignored the damaging impact on children, particularly those who are most vulnerable? There's a lot in that question, a lot of feels in there.
Yes, if you feel heavy, keep breathing. Okay.
Right, everyone take a deep breath, mm-hmm. and know that you're doing a good job for your kids.
If you feel that way, that means you care.
Yeah. So the first part, were teachers' different ways of evaluating and reporting student performance a hallmark of teachers' professionalism or an undermining of that professionalism? And there's several examples in the chapter about a teacher that says things like, well, I just have very high standards. And that feels like somebody who believes they're being more professional, but is it more professionalism, or is it an undermining of that professionalism?
I mean, in my opinion, that type of approach, if it's completely closed-minded, it's undermining. Of course, it would have to depend on the system that they're portraying, but when it comes down to it, everyone can improve, and professionalism is not a singularly defined concept. So professionalism for, this individual, I would say, is not going to make his classroom better.
Why did you assume it's a him?
Oh, that's a good one. I'm thinking pushback. That's it.
So are you saying that female teachers are more timid and less likely to push back?
Oh, I don't want to say that at all. No.
Dude, and this is an interesting thing to talk about. Like, our brains are full of implicit biases, right?
Totally.
We understand common stereotypes and behavior patterns and stuff. And everybody that thinks about this is going to think about people they know. Like, well, who have I seen give other teachers a hard time or push back at the admin? And were those more male teachers or more female teachers? Mm-hmm. Or, but those kinds of biases that we have by observing data, because we are data-driven creatures, mm-hmm. We can end up having those views about kids too.
Well, if it's not consistent assessments across the board, then that is where, it's an undermining of the profession in regards to, can that generalize? Mm-hmm. Is it actually reflective? Can that be shared, Yeah.
That whole premise of, I have the highest rigor. Mm-hmm. I have the highest standards or expectations. That intention to be separate instead of together with your professional team, mm-hmm. might have the sensation, the ego-based, pride-based sensation of feeling very professional, very good at your job. Mm-hmm. But it really, at least for me, upon evaluating it, like, it doesn't, like, you're not working well with a team. You're not necessarily doing what's going to help all your kids. Mm-hmm. There's probably a lot of implicit bias in the way you grade.
Totally.
It seems unprofessional.
Yeah, so, how impactful, right?
Yeah. So help me understand what makes that more professional for you to have different standards in your whole department, Mm-hmm.
And why are yours better?
Mm-hmm. The situation with Mallory brings up, the whole story is about a school administrator, about a school site, a school building administrator, and their challenges addressing the idea of grading with a school. Morgan, have you seen admin encounter a situation like Mallory's, or a problem like this, even if it wasn't grading?
Yeah, in regards to trying to get the collective board, teacher board, across all the teachers on our campus on board for anything, it's definitely something that takes time. Whatever the idea, whatever the concept is, it's something that needs to be introduced gently. But the idea of starting with the why, then going to the how, then going to the what, kind of that reverse selling, sales pitch of, let me tell you what I'm selling, let me tell you how it works, let me tell you why you need it. Mm-hmm. But starting with this is why we're doing this is how it works, and this is actually what it is. Having that sort of approach is what we're going to be kind of looking for and hoping to find within this reading. But my principals in admin taking that approach have helped with creating a grading foundation for us in a system that somewhat similarly aligns with this book, which is what kind of brought my interest to it. It's because my district introduced a concept that was very different from the previous district that I was from in regards to the autonomy that I got with my grading, of how much my grade book was weighed and, certain aspects and whatnot. But when I started at my most recent school this last year, and I was given your assessments are worth 80% of the grade, and the rest is pretty much the last 20% is everything else, homework, etc. That was something for me that I was open-minded to, just because that's the type of person I am, but that wasn't necessarily a mutual feeling with my coworkers, my new coworkers. At the time, we were all, new hires and whatnot.
Okay.
But introducing the concept and kind of talking a little bit about some of the points that we're going to talk about through this book study, but not elaborating on them in a way that had enough of a buy-in for me to completely change the way that I operate. I did last year under their structure, but with my cushions that I could make so that I felt that my kids were successful. So I tried to work within a system that I didn't completely understand. I respected, I follow along with, but in regards to, do I feel that my grades last year, even with the standards that are set, do I feel that they accurately reflect what my students know? I would say for about maybe 70% of them, yeah. Okay. The other 30%, no, because those 30%, that other 30%, my students, those were the kids that might have had that IEP paperwork. Those were the kids that might have needed that extra little bit of tutoring. So kind of incorporating all of that into my grading process and into my, my effort points, that's where I felt that I was doing a service, but I'm not doing my job. Like I'm not genuinely reflecting what they know. I'm reflecting how hard they worked to get to an idea.
Okay. Everybody has their own views and beliefs about grading. Mm-hmm. And some, I've talked to people that are brand new, first year, and they have very rigid views and beliefs about grading.
Okay.
And then, people with the most experience. There's a teacher at my school that has been with our district for 38 years.
Nice.
Got some experience.
Got a vet.
Got a toolbox full of tools, no doubt.
Mm-hmm.
Teaching maths.
Nice.
Yeah, probably got some great ideas. But I don't think you can do anything for 38 years and not develop things that you believe very strongly.
100%.
So with that, this book is dense. It's got a lot to think about and talk about, and to be able to pull the trigger and just change everything and fix it all of a sudden, it's not a realistic expectation.
It's overwhelming.
Totally. But to think about it and unpack it all and come up with a goal for what you want your grade to actually do and actually represent and actually measure and actually, what do you want it to do for the kid? How do you want the way that you grade to affect the students? That's something that I think a lot of people have an opinion about, but haven't looked at. There's a lot of research now about in what ways does a grade motivate a kid?
Mm-hmm.
Does the F motivate them to work harder? Do the late points motivate them to turn stuff in on time? What works? Yeah, I know my admin right now are very reticent to have conversations about grading with people, to the point where they just say, I can't.
Mm-hmm.
It might be more accurate to say that would be very challenging and might not go anywhere productive, to try to have a whole school conversation about grading, because people take it so personally. It's like their last bastion of academic autonomy for me to determine how many points homework is worth.
That's what we have, though, right? That's what our power is, in that sense, that where we are almost equivalent to an admin in that regard of, an admin can't force me to change my grade for any particular student. We can have conversations, we can make adjustments and things like that, but in regards to forcing me to do anything in particular to my grade book, other than maybe how I can structure certain things, that's where, as educators, that's some of our bread and butter.
A lot of states have different laws and policies about that. I know we're both teaching in California. I know what the California Ed Code says about it. Mm-hmm. And I'm talking to teachers, most of them don't know what it says about it. They think it implies that they have absolute autonomy And no, like a school absolutely can make a policy about grading. For instance, your school says like, no, assessments need to constitute 80% of the report card grade, the transcript grade. And they absolutely can do that. The only thing the Ed Code says, in fact, the Ed Code doesn't say that they can't do anything. It says that if, in California, if the school board or superintendent is going to override a grade, that first it says that the teacher is going to be the one to assign the grade. The teacher will determine what the grade is. And then if the school board or superintendent are going to override it, they have to engage that teacher in a discussion about why.
Okay.
So basically the teacher has to be able to make their case either verbally or in writing about why they gave that kid that grade.
Okay.
Like they have to be allowed to make their case for why what they determined to be, I gave the kid this grade, this is why. But the superintendent or the school board can still override it. And of course, unless there was a really good reason, they wouldn't do that, right?
You would hope.
Yeah, you would hope that that would be saved for the worst of circumstances, and that's probably why it's in the Ed Code, like just in case the worst of circumstances happen, that, you know, that we've got to change this because whatever terrible thing happened. But yeah, there's a lot of misconceptions that legally the teachers do have absolute autonomy, and no, I think usually it's more the case that school boards, school districts, school administrators want you to have as much autonomy as possible because you know your kids better than anybody.
Totally.
You know your content and your curriculum better than anybody. You know the way you assess your kids better than anybody. There's no way that any administrator can come in and improve the assessments of all departments in a school for all subjects, for all things. Like, no, that's why we have educated professionals for teachers.
Absolutely. Because
we're supposed to be the experts. And so without that autonomy for you to determine what's best, like that could go a really bad way.
Totally.
But that isn't to say that they can't have some guidelines about, hey, you probably shouldn't do this, or you probably shouldn't do that, or you probably should make this worth at least this much of the grade.
Yeah.
It gave me so much to think about reading this book. Like I had to listen to it twice and read it, and like, oh my gosh.
Had a lot of feels.
A lot of feels.
A lot of feels.
For context, I've had multiple careers, like multiple fields of work. I wasn't always in education. I used to work in emergency healthcare, and before that I worked in civil engineering materials testing. And so I've changed fields multiple times by choice, and but I'm the type of person that'll just like, I'll just take a leap. I'll just like make a change, just do it. And so when I decided I wanted to move from teaching healthcare to adults to teaching science to kids, I decided in February that I wanted to be a teacher, and in March I started classes, and in July I had a job.
Incredible.
And so for me to change, like I changed my grading practices in the middle of an academic year, which was precarious.
Yes.
Like a lot could have gone wrong.
Not for the faint of heart.
No, not for the faint of heart. Like if you're going to change anything, communicate with your student families enthusiastically,
100%.
like with a lot of effort. Like make sure you put as much information out as you can. And thankfully I got a lot of support from families in instituting a lot of the stuff that's in this and other books that hopefully we'll get a chance to review, some of which I've talked about on other podcast episodes, like the one with Dr. Derek Riddle. But it was scary, but that's how much it affected me emotionally, that in the first quarter of a school year, like August, September, I'm reading this book and thinking, there's no way I can continue. There's no way I can keep doing it the old way. Yep. I emotionally can't handle not fixing it or trying to move in that direction.
Yep.
So it's a lot, but
it's doable, everyone.
It's so doable.
It's doable,
and it's doable in small parts. Definitely doable in small parts. So Feldman goes on after the story about Mallory, about this poor principal that realizes the grading is inconsistent in the school she's trying to run, and encounters this topic of grading as this like the third rail, you know, the thing that cannot be touched. Feldman goes on to talk about his own journey In fact, the heading is My Own Journey, Frustrations and Hope, and describes a lot of frustrations and his own kind of journey of starting to read several articles that are mentioned in the book, and maybe we'll get to review some of those on the podcast in the future. One of the things he says is, I could never convince my principals, much less equip them, to find the language, strategies, or courage to address teachers' grading practices. Kind of sounds like what we were just talking about.
Yeah.
Like, it's Voldemort. Can't. Just can't go there.
Voldy.
It's old Voldy. It's old V.
Yeah, I mean, it's really hard when you feel, especially because of such a passion, like, of anybody that's a teacher, you don't do it for the money, you do it because you love what you do. So when we put our hearts on the line like that, and we genuinely are giving our time and our own effort to try and assess what we think a student's effort is, and we're told that that's not accurate, or that our assessment of, somebody else's performance, whatever it might be, situation, isn't at our standard, or isn't at their standard, it's personal.
How can it not be?
It's
somebody that does a job largely thankless, definitely not for the money, and busts their butt, staying late, planning until they can't see or speak or feel their eyes.
Falling asleep on the computer again.
Falling asleep on the computer again. Yeah, taking all their grading home and sacrificing their personal and life and romantic life and physical health and mental health to do this job, and really trying their hardest to be good at it. For somebody to come along and go, hey, you're doing everything wrong.
That's actually not good enough, thanks.
Right. Everything you're giving is not enough. Like, how is that supposed to feel?
Defeating. And yeah, exhausting.
Especially over something like nobody ever taught you how to do.
No.
And you're just winging it. So it seems like instead of saying, hey, you're doing everything wrong, a better approach could be, hey, do you want to talk about some ways that could make your job easier and improve your classroom management and your relationships with kids? Like, it does both. Requires a little bit of front end work just to figure out how you're going to change it. Like, you might realize that you want to change some of your assessments and your lessons to be more compatible. And then, that takes work. It takes time, sure. But you've got the rest of your career to make those tweaks on your own timetable.
Totally.
So if you want to talk about it and make little tweaks, is that something you're open to? Can we talk about it?
Yeah. How effective are you, and how effective do you want to be?
Yeah. How do you want your relationships with kids to look? How do you want them to view school? That was middle school is when I decided that school was stupid.
That is a common feeling in middle school.
Did you experience that?
I did experience that a little bit. To give the fullest transparency, I also got headgear when I was in 7th grade, so there was a little bit of a different situation to why my world was ending and everything sucked. I was a student that I loved school. I loved getting grades. I loved getting points. That was something attainable for me, that I could measure, that I could organize my time around, accomplishing. And as we get through this book, and as I even reflect as myself as a teacher, the type of student that I was, academically successful. But if you can ask me about certain concepts that I was academically successful at when I was in 6th and 7th and 8th grade, I cannot give them back to you unless I do, a little bit of a review or a revamping, and then, oh yeah, that sounds a little bit familiar. But my success as a student, I don't think was accurately reflected when I was younger. So socially, the world sucked, everything like that. Academically, I really felt successful in middle school, and then in high school when things were actually challenging, and, experiencing first sets of failures, and like, oh my gosh, my effort is as much of a factor as it was before. It's not now. It's, the world was ending in middle school.
It's common. It's common for kids to be going through intense emotional stuff in middle school.
Oh, yeah.
Combined with the hormones are assaulting your brain. Yeah, I was going through stuff in middle school, living with one single parent and then the other, and trying to acclimate to changing schools multiple times and making new groups of friends, and through changing schools and districts, going from like in primary school being very academically successful, being, you know, leading the distribution in a lot of areas that were measured like skill wise and standardized test wise and all of that, like, you know, reading years beyond my age, and, you know, math was not only simple but fun. Like, I loved it, and it came quickly and easily. Like all that, like having, like, liking school, really liking school, even social studies, which was never my thing, like being good at it, being interested, wanting to talk about whatever ancient Egypt that we studied in whatever year, and California history and all that. Like, I loved school. Then I ended up in middle school, and I remember taking classes that weren't as engaging. You know, when you're a teenager, why do you want to pay attention to school? Your brain's telling you, like, pay attention to people you're sexually attracted to and whatever the heck that means.
What does that smell?
Paying attention to social factors, and are you building a secure social group? You don't, you know, realize that that's what it is, but that's what your brain's trying to do. Like,
totally.
Build a tribe, be part of a tribe. All these things that your brain's worrying about. And I'd been academically successful. Like, I could try very little. My effort didn't look the same as everybody else's effort, because I can learn your math without doing your 42 practice problems.
Yep.
Like, in fact, I already know how to do this, so I'm just gonna not. And then coming to those situations with teachers where, you know, trying to have a discussion as a 13-year-old with an adult, like, well, hey, I got an A on the test, so why do I need to do your homework?
Yep.
Why? Because you do. Well,
cool.
I can tell you what my response to that was, at least mentally, and it wasn't polite. As a snotty, testosterone-filled 13-year-old boy.
Oh, you weren't receptive?
I'm still not receptive. I'll be honest with you, Morgan, like, I still haven't warmed up to school. I still, like, am contemptuous.
It's
like,
not a fair fight. It's not a fair game.
Well,
right now.
It can be.
It can be.
And I mean, this is how important this is. Like, I'm not 13 anymore. I'm older than that now. I'm in my 40s. Not even 40. I'm now in my 40s.
Nice.
And I still, at this age, have contempt for education as a professional educator.
100%.
Because I remember as a teenager coming to these realizations that, like, oh, school isn't even about learning. It's about you telling me what to do. And I don't need you to tell me what to do. Like, I probably know more about what I need to do than you do. So our relationship's over. And guess what? My interest in your class is also over, because it kind of seems like you're not even teaching math. You just want me to comply and sit still and shut up. And, you know, I'd love to learn math. I love math. I love it to this day. But yeah, I didn't love every math teacher. My 9th grade geometry teacher, oh, loved it. Learning trigonometry, fantastic.
Cool.
Some of my calculus teachers in college, love it. Had one that I hated. Had 2 that I loved. But yeah, it can be that important. Like, it can make a lifelong difference in a child's relationship with education, period.
Totally.
Just the way that you assess them, the way that you determine their grade. If I know how to do all your math, why should I not get the highest grade possible in your class?
Exactly.
Like, I can do anything you can give to me. And it's not that I can't do your homework. I just don't believe it has any value.
And it might not for you.
And it might not. It might not. Like, I took the quiz, got 100%, finished before everybody else in class. Can you politely get out of my face?
Yeah, peace out. Peace right on out.
Right. Yeah. those were my reactions. And man, I'm feeling it right now talking about it. Like it's making me feel a little saucy.
A little agitated?
Yeah.
A little agita?
And I, because I encountered the same thing in college. Like, hey man, what do you want me to learn?
I want you to dance. Monkey dance.
Yeah. And that's what it probably feels like to these kids. And they might not all have grown up in a culture that views education and the education system the way that you as a teacher experienced. They probably don't see the value in behavioral compliance if they're learning.
Oh, I've been told, Miss Morgan, fuck your points. Hey, I hear that, right? Fuck my points. Why?
Yeah.
I'm not getting here on time because, I'm getting my sister up. I'm getting my brother up. I'm taking them to school. I, do this, and this. I can do the basics of this. You want me to come to school 5 minutes early? Not going to happen. You get 5 extra credits. Miss Morgan, fuck your points. Heard. Respected.
Yeah.
No problem.
And that is a completely reasonable reaction.
100%.
That is a reaction that kid should have. Because they have adult level responsibilities.
Yep.
At 12.
And that was in my first year of teaching. So that perspective is what I needed of that humbling.
That was from a high schooler? That was when you were doing...
I was a 5th grader.
That was a grade 5-ish person?
5th grader.
Wow.
5th grade homie had a tough world, was a tough cookie, and absolutely learned how to, and was learning how to manage their world, which was not the same as my world. Fuck my points.
Yeah. I mean, 10 I didn't live with my younger sisters, but 12 I lived with my younger sisters and like watched them, cooked them dinner. Like, yeah. And also didn't need to do extra work. I already know how to do this, so fuck your points.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
I needed that though.
Yeah, man. I'll find while we're talking. There's another. Oh yeah, right here. Found it. So after Feldman talks about culturally narrow definitions of what effort looks like, he says, thirdly, teachers often use grades for behavior modification, offering the reward or punishment of points, and use or threaten to use the 0 or F to motivate students, even though the motivational F is largely a myth. Research is clear that low grades or the threat of low grades do nothing for the student who has low confidence in their academic abilities or limited experience with academic success. The majority of students who receive Fs.
Oh my gosh, I have. If you have taught more than 1 year and you had any student that was in the F qualifier, you have these babies' faces right now inside the back of your head. I have 2 kids right now that the moment that they received that low score, that was it.
Checked out.
Yep, bye. Oh, I failed. I am a failure. I will continue to fail. My effort is going to be used elsewhere.
Which is scary because every F a kid receives increases their chance of dropping out of high school. Every F they receive, especially in middle and secondary, every time they receive a F, their chance of dropping out goes up. And every teacher already knows what dropping out of high school, how that affects a kid's path.
Totally.
Yeah.
The limits.
Yeah. I mean, your chance of all of the bad things happening to you as an adult, prison, etc., just exponentially go up.
Without a lot of the tools that you can get from going to school.
So it's crazy because kids intrinsically are curious. They want to learn stuff. Maybe not your content area, maybe not what your standards say they're supposed to learn about whatever this week. But kids want to learn stuff. They're curious.
Sure.
And especially when you can make it social, for them to do it together, they kind of dig it.
Oh, yeah.
They like a challenge, especially if they get to talk smack on each other a little bit.
Working together even.
Yeah. The first semester I started grading differently. I wasn't great at it, and I was trying to make a very good standards-based assessment. And I had some kids that were struggling to use class time in the same way other kids were to get this assessment done. They had to come up with an experiment to prove that an object's mass will affect a change in its velocity, right? Like an object with more mass is not going to speed up as much in response to the same force, right? Some Newton's laws kind of stuff. And they had to just design an experiment and explain it to show that they get the concepts and that they can work with variables, and, you know, it's all built into the next generation science standards. So I had these kids that weren't getting it done as well as others, and so I had these few kids from different periods, had them all come in at lunch, and I had the campus supervisors just round them up at lunch, like, hey, I need you to bring so-and-so, so-and-so, and so-and-so in my room today. So if you see them out on the quad, they're not supposed to be there. They need to come get this done. All right, Schulke, I got you. And sure enough, had these kids come to my room, and we sat down and talked, and when it was just me and the four of them, I could tell that they got it. Like, they got it enough to do it. I'm like, all right, well, I just need to see you come up with this experiment and explain it to me and talk about it. It'll probably take a couple lunch periods, but why don't I give you guys a few minutes? You have your checklist of what you need to get done. I'm gonna give you some time to talk about it. And they spontaneously, these kids that are your quote unquote F students, like, look at their transcript, they're straight F, they have straight Fs, you know? And some of them have barriers, like I think all of them were English language learners, or at least classified as EL or reclassified students. A couple had IEPs. They had a lot of challenges. All low SES students, low socioeconomic status students that all came from the elementary schools in the poorer side of town. But getting them working together and to watch them collaborate and actually come up with it, like, you could tell that they knew it. They just needed to be able to do it in a way that was socially engaging. Totally. And talk a little shit, like, no, fool, that's not the mass. That's not how you measure it. Did you zero out the thing, dumbass? Like, and let them work through it.
100%.
And all of a sudden, these straight F kids, like, earned an A- for that quarter, because all the stuff we're supposed to learn, they learned.
Exactly.
But if their grade was going to be like the previous quarter, when there was like late penalties and zeros and that, like, they all would have gotten an F, despite the fact that they got it. And that makes me feel icky.
I was just thinking that right now. Like, that my bellies, or my babies that I was thinking of previously in regards to my failing students, that they were already, you know, emotionally, academically, they're pieced out. The only reason that they showed up every day is because they enjoyed the climate of the classroom. But other than that, in regards to my content knowledge and, you know, subject, could not give two shits. So, I mean, yes, there's a little bit of a battle won there with that kid wanting to show up, just enjoying the peers that they're around and enjoying the environment that they're in. But if you have that already, like, and now you're aware of how you can make things better, like, if you know that those kids, you know, those failing kids might continue to repeat those types of behaviors, right? After reading this book and getting through here and reading some of the data, now taking that responsibility of, like, okay, I have an awareness, make some adjustments. 50% of the buy-in is them just wanting to be in the room. Other 50% of it is making it so that you can connect that content to them, and they're growing vines to make those connections to you. You just have to meet them. Yeah. It's a little bit more complicated, but
meet them where they're at. Let a 12-year-old act 12.
God forbid.
God forbid. I was just talking to one of our mutual friends and colleagues who listened to our recent interview and said that it made her think about behavior management in her classroom.
Nice.
And reconsider, like, oh yeah, 12-year-old boys are supposed to want to roughhouse. That is called healthy development. They're supposed to want to play and throw stuff and run, and, like, that's normal. And so what you're seeing is a kid that doesn't have other opportunities to do that and is trying to, like, figure out how to do these healthy behaviors. They're just coming out at a time where you don't like it because it's inconvenient for you getting through your lesson today.
They feel safe enough to act that way, though. That's in that way. There are some kids that act like absolute, just pushing every boundary and experience, and within the class. But when you talk to their parents, oh, we don't see that. Little Johnny would never do that at home. So it's sometimes your classroom is the place where they are going to push those boundaries, learn those limits. I mean, somewhat as it should be, what a gift you have, all those teachable opportunities.
Yeah. To go, hey man, is this the time or place for that? Like, how can we build a time and place for it? Or how is that hurting other people's opportunity to learn right now? How are you harming other people? Like, let's have a reflective moment. Instead of, oh, Thomas loses 5 participation points today.
Yep,
sucks for you, Thomas.
15 minutes outside, Thomas.
Yeah. Oh man, talk to my students from this past year, man. I'm guilty of getting frustrated, especially when I'm short-slept. Like, I'll own that. Short-slept, I'm a grumpy Gus.
We all are.
Yeah.
Grace.
Grace. Yeah.
I'm excited about this book.
Well, let's wrap up talking about this prologue chapter. We haven't even started the meat of the book yet, but the prologue makes such a good appeal. It really is like it's an emotional but a logical appeal at the same time, because
100%.
He cites some papers, some research, explains that talks about what he's going to talk about. That, hey, we're going to talk about why zeros hurt and why Fs hurt and why late penalties are actually bad and they do not accomplish what you think they're accomplishing. And talks about it, explains it. It's really good, and we're going to dig into all of it. We already talked about how we talked about the challenges of admin and having conversations with colleagues. How can we get others to embrace a change like this with us, other than just casually having conversations? Like, what else is out there to get people to make small changes?
I think it helps. So for me, for example, the reason I started reading this book is that organic conversation that we had in regards to just trying to be better teachers, right? So it's having say that question again for me one more time. So
how can we get our colleagues, get others to embrace it with us?
By trying to lead by example, trying to give as much information as we are given here, the resources, the articles, all the research studies. You can do the homework. You can read that. You can break it down yourself. In regards to getting the buy-in from your teachers, we've talked a little bit about it. How do you want to make your life easier? Do you want to accurately reflect what your kids know versus what you think they know? It's not what you think they know, it's what do you know they know. And if you can't confidently 100% say that, you need to make an adjustment as a teacher. I think that would be kind of the first point to start with, of planting that seed in the back of their head of, like, if they can't confidently say that what they're assessing is accurately reflecting what the students know, and that is fundamentally in sync with the standards, as a teacher, you can do your job better. So that, hopefully, and what I've noticed, at least with my couple of individuals that I have in my 7th grade group, that was the question that stuck with me the most and what made me really buy into this, as well as when I shared it with my coworkers. Planting that seed created that curiosity, and as long as they can generate some sort of curiosity about, well, what do you mean, that is enough to get it started.
Now we've got a starting point.
Exactly.
Now we can have more and more conversations with greater and greater depth.
Exactly.
Love it. We talked about the standards, the expectations. One of the things that Feldman said in the book is that changing grading practices actually raised standards. Because one of the things I've heard from colleagues is that, oh, well, you're just doing that so that you have fewer Fs, or that the kids get higher grades, or that your grade averages don't look as bad, or whatever. And like, no, that's not connected to the why at all. But I experienced exactly what Feldman said, that changing practices did raise grades, and it also raised the expectations. Because when the kids understood that, like, oh, the only way to get the grade I want is to learn what I'm supposed to learn and learn how to do what I'm supposed to learn how to do. Like, learning success is the path. It doesn't matter. Like, I have no incentive to cheat. Like, if I copy my friend's homework,
doesn't matter.
It doesn't benefit me at all. Like, there's no benefit. Like, that was a waste of time. I'm better to just not do it and go ask the teacher questions, or actually sit and try to figure it out, because there's no penalty for getting it done late. And all I'm going to be graded on is, like, do I get this or not? And I know that I don't get it yet. That was the big transition I noticed, is I went from, every teacher's favorite questions are, when is this due? How many points is this worth? Is this going to affect my grade? Will this bring my grade up? How can I bring my grade up? Favorite questions in the world, right?
Those are the only ones we get, pretty much.
I went from getting those questions to never getting those questions anymore, and instead getting, Mr. Schulke, I do not understand this stuff about light waves. Like, what is the difference between amplitude and wavelength? I don't get it.
What a reflective moment.
Yeah.
Any teacher, if you can think of a student that has ever identified where they're having their, struggle in learning, bless them.
For them to get what they don't get.
Yeah.
Those were the questions I started getting, to get what they don't get, or like ask for clarification about a rubric, which usually meant that I didn't make the rubric good enough.
Okay.
The kids would point out where I screwed up and needed to do a better job.
Cool.
Yeah, for a kid to go, hey, Schulke, I don't understand under these criteria to get a 3 on this this project, this model. It says blah 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 blah. I don't understand what you mean by that. Like,
what does that look like?
Do you have an example? Like, what does that look like? Is this? And sometimes it'd be like, oh yeah, I wrote that really poorly. Like, let me clarify that for everyone. Thank you for bringing that to my attention, man. Like, that's great. Like, because I'd use, rubrics are hard to make.
They are hard to make.
A good rubric is hard to make. A crappy rubric doesn't take very much time.
You can look that up on Google.
Yeah, ChatGPT will write it for you. But writing a good one is hard. Do you think that, you already have a grade system that values assessments as the biggest chunk of the transcript grade,
yes,
of the report card grade. Do you think that raises the standard for kids?
I think it absolutely did, in regards to, my kids took their performance tasks or their, assessments with way higher of a sense of urgency and angst, of their own, knowledge, preparation, all of that. But again, so last year was the first year that I had that structure, and for the students that I felt that they were giving effort but weren't performing, that's where I would make those adjustments on effort and be able to tweak, that this student received a B- when in regards to their standardized testing, they are not at a B-, but they worked their ass off for me in class. So it absolutely raised the standards in regards to the student's expectation of, yes, my tests are impactful, but as an educator, I don't think that I did them the service of making them those assessments as impactful as they could be, considering that I gave them so many cushions to make everyone comfortable, including myself, of, oh, that's a low F. What can we do for that? How can we modify that? What extra credit can we, obviously, the way that I approached this maybe didn't work. So what else can we do versus what we'll talk about here in the book of figuring out how to prepare them so that they know what they're going to be asked day 1. They know what they're going to be asked day 30 or day 100 or whatever day is that they're going to be, assessed for their success. So, yeah.
Making the learning targets clear from the beginning, not a mystery.
Totally.
Making them know exactly what's expected of them. Yeah, giving them a goal. They know where they're headed. And if they don't, then they know what questions to ask.
Exactly. It's a map. You got to give them the map.
Yeah. Are there, so you've read more than the prologue.
I have.
But without getting too much into the minutia that's in the chapters to come, are there things that you're thinking about your grading right now that you'd really, success-wise or standards-wise, like as standards meaning like expectations, are there any tweaks you're thinking of right now? Like, or even if you don't know specifically what you want to do, like things you know you want to change?
Well, I'm going to start chapter by chapter. So I teach math. So I'm going to start unit or chapter by chapter, and I'm going to work on trying to create a rubric and an assessment that is cohesive and something that I can give to my students on day one of when we're going to be, starting to cover Unit 1 in math, which, it's not our first week, but it's our second week of school. So we have our first week of 3 days, then, we start on that next Monday. And on Monday, I'm hoping to give them that map, at least for this unit, at least for that chapter of like, this is what we're going to look to attain. This is what we're going to look to accomplish. This is kind of what it looks like. And seeing how it goes. So creating a rubric with the assessments that I've already have inside my curriculum, that's the first point that I'm trying to think about right now, because my grade book is already structured in a way similar to this that we've specified, where we have 80% for assessments and 20% essentially for everything else, homework, participation, that in that regard. So rubric, taking a peek at my assessment and seeing if I can pull some standards. Try and have all of those be a little bit more synonymous. It's a little overwhelming to think about at first, but
sure.
Starting with just my first assessment and seeing, can I create a rubric for that first assessment? Because I do not have a rubric for my first math assessment.
Okay. It's a good thing to think about. It's like, what does success look like? What are your different success categories? And rubrics are complicated. To make a good rubric that explains what success or nearly meeting the standard or not quite meeting the standard or no evidence of learning, creating a rubric that has the fewest number of outcome categories that you can, like, how much do you really need to differentiate? Do they need to be 101 different ways, 101 different scores you can get on a test? No. I really only, like, if I'm
4.
testing, like, do you know this or not? 4. There really only need to be 4. Like, yeah. And yeah, all mine now are 0 to 4.
Cool.
And 3 means you met standard. 4 is you've exceeded. And I'll share with you there's a great grading scale from Robert Marzano, how to use that to, like, turn that into a letter grade that goes on their transcript, and even had to learn how to, like, set up our grading software, our learning management system differently, so that we can I can put in those grades that way, and still so my grade book's different. It's 100% assessments.
Cool. Nothing
else. Daily classwork, homework, behavior-based stuff, participation. I don't put it in anymore, and some people are still going to do that. I found that that's what fits best for my philosophy now and my class and what I've seen in the evidence, like digesting a lot of these books, and it so far it's worked.
Cool.
Like, it's really, really worked. Engagement is up so much, and I've gathered a lot of data from the kids, and including just their own perceptions about school and learning and grading and what it means, and which models actually help them succeed, and their responses, like, bring me to tears, to hear them say stuff like, oh yeah, in some of my other classes, I kind of feel like my grade doesn't make sense, and it's kind of based on my behavior and whether I turn stuff in, and I don't really have to learn anything in order to get a good grade. But this class actually got harder and easier at the same time, because I have to learn to get a good grade, but I know exactly what I have to do. And I can do test retakes, and there's plenty of chances and plenty of help, and I know exactly what I have to do. And it's less stressful because I don't have to worry about turning in a piece of paper every day. There's no more pressure to cheat. Oh my God, the cheating. How much do you think your kids are cheating?
Every day, every homework assignment, I would hope not in any of my assessments with as many steps as I get in my goddamn pedometer, but in regards to homework, if there's anything that's done outside of your classroom that you're not specifically observing that student do or perform or whatever, there is a possibility that they are cheating, getting their information in a way that's not going to make it so that they remember this in the future. Yeah. Probably more often than not in a lot of homework that goes home.
After I read this, I was very interested in the instances of cheating. I caught some kids copying work for my class and for others. Math especially.
Oh, easy. It's easy in math to copy.
Yeah, or using like the there's an app, you know, where you just take a picture of the math problem and the
sure do. I will not plug the app.
Not gonna plug it.
No.
Very harmful for a kid that needs to learn their operations. So I gathered some data.
Okay.
First thing I did was just an informal survey. Raise your hand if in junior, these are 8th graders, first quarter of 8th grade. So they've finished 7th grade and they're like a month or two into 8th grade. Raise your hand if you've ever copied work. Out of 160-ish kids, and keep in mind, these are kids that are actually enrolled in a STEM track, which is supposed to be an extra rigorous track where they get extra STEM experiences and more project-based learning.
Cool.
And so these are kids that are highly academically successful and have engaged parents and they like school. And it was every student except one raised their hand that they had copied/cheated in their first 5 quarters of junior high.
Totally.
7th grade, beginning of 8th grade. It was all of them. And you know, there's the one hesitant kid that like, you just don't want to, maybe you are super ethical and good for you. That's great. And knowing that kid, like, they didn't need to.
Got it. Yeah.
There's really no need for them. They were probably the one that everybody wanted
cheated
to copy
off of.
Yeah. Yeah. Great kid. Great kid. But everybody else was like, yeah, I've copied stuff. Like,
sure.
First of all, can I trust you, science man? Or are you going to call my mommy?
Exactly.
So it's just hesitant. Like, I'm going to wait for the other 29 people to raise their hands and raise mine. So then I'm like, all right, can I get some good data? And can I pair that with some student statements or cross-reference it with like their GPA or their academic history? So now I'm going to do a Google form. And I did a couple questions about cheating. And one was, have you at any time here at our junior high school, 7th and 8th grade, copied work for any class? And they had to log in with their, they knew the form was collecting their email addresses, and I just promised them that I was going to keep it confidential.
Cool.
And these are kids I'd had for like 2 months. Cool. And I was like, hey, I promise you, I'm not going to share this. I'm not going to share your name with any adult ever. I'm not going to call your parents about it. I just want to gather some data to know how common this is. So just please trust me and be honest. 88% yes.
Dang.
And then the next question, have you ever done it for my class?
Ooh.
33% yes.
Okay.
And that's with them knowing that I can see who said yes.
Yes.
So the data is going to be a little bit skewed.
Sure.
But still, to know that copying/cheating is that they just see it as the way you have to play the game.
Absolutely.
Like
that's a system.
My grade, 25% of my grade is homework, and that homework just means, do I turn in the paper with all the blanks filled in by the time class starts? Yeah, I'm gonna copy it off my friend in the class before yours, or in the hallway on my way here, and then I'm gonna put it in the bin and I'm gonna get my 10 points, because that's the game you've invented.
Exactly.
I'm just playing it.
Doing it well.
Doing it well. I got straight A's.
Crushing it, bud.
Right? Yeah. This is just the prologue. There's a lot there, man.
How you like them apples?
Oh, man. So the last thing says, it's time to embrace the third rail. I think that if any of us as an individual are ready to embrace it for ourselves, that doesn't necessarily mean you have to have the tough conversations with everybody you work with. You don't have to talk to other people about their grading, but man, are you ready to look at your own practice and give yourself some grace and ask, like, is what I'm doing working? Is it working? And what evidence do I have that it's working? Mm-hmm. And if you're using your gradebook as a way to behaviorally motivate children, then you should have some data that shows that every single year, those behaviors change from the beginning of the year to the end of the year. But if you're using grades to teach kids how to turn stuff in on time, and you have the same number of missing assignments last quarter as first quarter, then those data show that what you're doing isn't working.
Yeah, there's not much growth.
Not much growth. And I think if we take the time to humbly examine, is what we're doing actually working? We might realize that there's room to re-examine it at least.
Get your egos out of the way, y'all.
Yeah, you don't have to make a big change. Just have to be willing to consider it. And if you're willing to make a small change and see if that helps, give it a little time, see if it helps, I think that could be the path to improving exactly the things that Feldman said. Improve, what are all the things he said? But the teachers who tried these practices found that they could actually change students' attitudes and behaviors. Students who had seemed unmotivated and even resistant to learning became more engaged. Relationships between students and teachers were now partnerships based on trust, transparency, and perhaps most importantly, hope. Students persevered when they struggled, took initiative, stopped cheating, and wanted to learn even after the test, all because of how teachers graded. Man, just changing a couple policies in your syllabus has the power to do all that. All the things that we struggle with and all the things that frankly are getting harder to deal with.
Totally.
Behaviors are different. Post-COVID, teaching is different.
It's a different world.
Yeah, it is a different world, and nobody thinks it's trending in a direction that's going to make teaching easier. Mm-hmm. So
let's help.
Let's help, man. Grading can be a weapon. Ms. Morgan, anything to add?
If you're already this far and you're listening and you're still somewhat encouraged, you're doing the right thing. You're in the right spot.
Yeah.
If you're a little apprehensive, talk to coworkers, talk to people that you trust. Do you want to be better?
I think apprehension is good. Apprehension just means you need to see some proof.
Totally.
And if you need to see some proof, we're going to dig into every chapter of this book. I'll even pull up some of the studies that are cited to explain the science of how this stuff has been proven to work. We'll go over some of the data. If you're apprehensive, listen to the rest of this book study, share it with your colleagues, and have these conversations. Buy the book. Go buy Joe Feldman's book.
Please go buy it.
See the link in the description to purchase the book, or whatever. It's called Grading for Equity by Joe Feldman. Grading for Equity: what it is, why it matters, and how it can transform schools and classrooms. Joe Feldman. Check it out. Thank you, people, for your time and attention.
Thanks, everybody.
Ms. Morgan, anything you want to close with? I'll let you give the closing remark.
How effective are you? Can you be more effective? And if you know in your belly you can, because you already know, we'll see you next episode.
Bye, everybody. Thank you. Thank you for your time and attention. We plan to bring you new episodes regularly to continue studying this book and others. To support us, please subscribe on YouTube and other platforms, and check out links in the description to buy this book and others. This has been Education Upgrade.